the original author there, Debs. So I'm going to give you like the shortest possible mini lecture about World War I, which means I'm going to ignore so much. We're just going to really do a very, very broad overview, ending with the first American Red Scare. That is during the end of World War I and into the 1920s. There's this Red Scare, and a Red Scare references fear of communism. So we're going to end there, and that'll get you ready to talk about Debs, who was arrested in 1918 for criticizing the American government during war. And you're reading an excerpt of his speech to the jury. So he's been found guilty. They're sentencing him to see how long. He's literally sent to jail for 10 years. He gets out early. And this is his speech to the jury defending himself. So you're going to read that. But I want to walk you a little bit through World War I while I pull up my slides. If you want to chat or unmute, I'll unmute y'all just for a second. It's okay if you've got like kids in the background or whatever. I don't care about that. So I've got y'all unmuted just for a moment. And while I pull up my slide, if you want to, you can put in chat or you can say out loud what you know. There we go. Oh, I've lost chat. Hold on. This is like my constant struggle. I'm always losing chat. Lost it. Okay. Oh, I know what I need to do. I didn't share my screen correctly. Okay, share screen. So y'all can tell me what you know about World War I. If anything, someone's snacking. Someone's eating some popcorn. I don't know who to mute. I'm gonna mute y'all again because someone's really snacking. But if you want to put in chat anything that you know about World War I to get us started, if not, I'm gonna tell you stuff, so that's fine too. All right, you're just ready. You're like, I'm just here to learn anything. I didn't know that I was gonna have to come with my knowledge. That's totally fine. World War I is a global war. And I want to go over here. There we go. A global war that begins in the unlikeliest possible way. And that is with the assassination of the Archduke of Bosnia, whose name is Franz Ferdinand. Okay. Archduke of Bosnia, you've probably never heard of this guy, except there's a band named after him. Franz Ferdinand, he's the heir to the throne of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. His assassination at the hands of a group called the Black Hand. They are fighting for their own self-rule in Serbia. So these Serbian nationals, one of them assassinates the Archduke of Austria-Hungary because they want their own self-rule. They've been colonized. Okay, you're like, what does this have to do with America? How does America get involved? One of the reasons that this event, the assassination of the Archduke, becomes a global war is that the years before 1914, European powers had been militarizing. They had been essentially preparing for war. And this is part of the European, we call it the scramble for Africa, colonization of Africa. European powers are fighting each other over that. And European powers, I'm going to show you a very bad little thing that I obviously stole this from the internet. European powers have, as part of this militarization, they've created networks of aid agreements, treaties, and alliances, some of them secret. This complicated Venn diagram shows us how the attempted assassination of the Archduke of Franz Ferdinand, which leads Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia. When you declare war on Serbia, you've pulled in Russia that's promised Serbia aid. When you've pulled in Russia, you see these alliances and treaties with France and Britain. And on the other side, you see that Austria-Hungary pulls in Italy, Germany, and the Ottoman Empire, as well as Bulgaria. So this event, this assassination, erupts into a European war. And because these European superpowers have colonized Africa, Asia, and elsewhere, this becomes a global war. I think I have a map somewhere. There we go. I have a map where you can see the percentage of population. So you can see that, for instance, Australia, colonized by England, had about 1 to 2% casualty rate. You can see here that there's high casualties from people from the Middle East, from Africa, because these colonized people were also part of the war. And you can see, of course, that America and Canada are going to join the war as well. Now, Americans don't want to join this war. This war that erupts in 1914, Americans are like, what does this war have to do with us? Look at this, all these treaties and alliances, where's America? And in fact, many Americans argue that through peace, they'll have better relationships, that they can stay neutral. Even though some Americans say Britain has been our ally, they associate Great Britain with democracy in Europe. Other immigrant groups like Irish American immigrants are like, no, Britain's been very bad to us. We don't want to fight with them. So a lot of Americans want neutrality on this. You can see here this peace postcard. Peace has her conquests far greater than war. That if we retain peace with all of these European superpowers, we'll be better off. And this peace postcard features a ship that goes from Europe to America called the Lusitania. They couldn't have picked a worse ship because the Lusitania in 1915 will be bombed by a German U-boat, a German submarine, and actually sank. Couldn't have picked a worse boat to put on your peace postcard. Now, President Wilson runs in 1914, and part of his platform is, I will keep us out of war. I will keep us out of this war. You can see here that he will keep us out of war through preparation. After the sinking of the Lusitania, Wilson said, Germany, cut it out. We are going to begin preparation that if you attack other ships that have American civilians, Lusitania killed about 1,200 people, many of them Americans. Wilson says, Germany, if you continue to bomb ships, to torpedo ships from your U-boats, we will come into, you will not be happy. So Wilson says, that's enough. That's going to keep us out. Germany's not going to mess with American ships anymore. Germany knows they don't want us in this war. And then, so 1914 to 1917, the war has been raging in Europe, and we're going to talk in a couple of moments. This is a devastating war. Britain wants America to help win this war. And in 1917, British intelligence, so spies from Great Britain, discover and decode what's called the Zimmermann telegram. And the Zimmermann telegram, discovered in January of 1917, was a telegram from the German ambassador to Mexico. And it essentially said, Mexico, if you attack the United States, Germany will come to your aid and help you recapture all of that land that you lost in the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Texas, basically, right? So the German ambassador says, Mexico, attack the United States, Germany will come and assist you in getting that land back. And Mexico was like, that seems like a bad idea. And the Zimmermann telegram was uncovered. The plot was foiled. And this is sort of the last call for Wilson and for Congress. Wilson immediately asks Congress to declare war on Germany in order to, quote, make the world safe for democracy. Germany was associated with autocracy, and which is like a monarchy that has ultimate power, total power. Now, of course, you can't just declare war with Germany, right? If you're at war with Germany, you are at war with Italy, Austria-Hungary, the Ottoman Empire, but mostly you're at war with Italy and Germany. And if you are at war with Italy, Germany, and Austria-Hungary, you are allied with Russia, France, and Britain. So now America's in this war. What was World War I like? World War I is called the Great War in this time. So people didn't call it World War I until World War II. It was called the Great War. was also called the war to end all wars. There was a real belief in Europe and elsewhere that this type of war wouldn't happen again because it was so devastating. Military historians, usually when they talk about the first modern war, they're talking about World War I. Even though some of the elements existed previously, World War I absolutely changed how war was fought. If you've ever seen a movie or a documentary, let's say about Napoleon and wars, let's say Waterloo in 1812, right? You'll see these images of armies marching towards each other, eventually meeting each other and finding and firing. And you'll see generals up on the hill that make decisive decisions that win or lose that battle, right? The flank will go here, send in the cavalry, right? That these decisions can change that battle. And battles were deadly and dangerous, right? Thousands and thousands of men died at Waterloo. But that style of fighting is over in World War I. And what takes its place is trench warfare. Trench warfare epitomizes World War I and how different it is. World War I will become a defensive war. That's when you get dug into these trenches, because there's new technologies, automatic weapons, machine guns, poison gas, tanks, airplanes, barbed wire, flamethrowers. They don't work very well. And these new technologies aren't matched by mobilization technology, which means no one knows yet how to meet these offensively. So what happens instead, and here's some of the, you can see the barbed wire, you rolling over the barbed wire, machine guns, poison gas, that's why they're wearing gas masks, heavy artillery, here you can see a mortar exploding, and these flamethrowers, which actually didn't work very well, but you can see how terrifying it would be to see this flamethrower coming towards you. What this led to, because that technology wasn't matched by how do we overcome it, what we get instead is these trenches. And you can see here that these trenches are literally dug into the earth. So first of all, you know, just because of these trenches that are dug in, that are really stable here, concrete blockhouses for machine guns, this is already telling you that these armies get stuck, that they get dug in. This is not a highly mobile situation. For instance, at the Battle of the Somme in France, the first half an hour of the first day, there's over 20,000 casualties. Over the period of 4 months that the Battle of Somme was fought, and you can double check me on the dates on that, 4 to 6 months, there was almost 1 million casualties, that is injured or killed. And when we talk about the Battle of the Somme, we don't talk about who won or lost. It doesn't matter. There's no land gained, nothing is gained. Instead, this becomes a defensive war where the object is to wear down the other side. Who is going to run out of heavy artillery? Who is going to run out of resources? Who is going to run out of men to fight this war first? And what you see here, you see these little soldiers here. And this was called going over the top. So to try and gain land, to try and defeat the other side, eventually the soldiers would have to go over the top to leave the trenches and enter what's called no man's land. They're not protected. You can see that the heavy artillery is coming from here. They have to cut through barbed wire and try and get into these trenches where the soldiers in the trenches are in the defensive position, so they have the upper hand. This is devastating for number of deaths and for serious injuries, including loss of limb. Overall, in World War I, there are over 10 million military deaths, and we don't know how many civilian deaths, but up to 7 million. This was absolutely devastating. And it created injuries that that armies and generals weren't familiar with. Things like shell shock. So in Britain, the British Army leadership started noticing that men were coming back with injuries that they were describing, but that doctors couldn't find. They were coming back with injuries that were not visible on their bodies. And at first, doctors thought these must be brain injuries. They must be concussions, like from being close to the mortar fire. So they called this shell shock. And the symptoms of shell shock included uncontrollable shaking, nightmares, anxiety, blindness or deafness that didn't have a physical cause. So they couldn't see, but doctors couldn't understand why. They called this shell shock. What do we call this? Does anyone want to type in the chat or unmute yourself? Y'all are shy. Does anyone know what this is called now? This is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Psychiatry is like in its infancy. Thank you so much. Anything interesting, I promise. No, I was saying that we were wrapping up on shell shock. During World War II, Britain will discover that civilians can face this as well because they're bombed in London. During Vietnam, the American military and media and others will call this Vietnam syndrome. And now, of course, we understand it to be PTSD, and we understand that it's something that disproportionately affects soldiers and sailors, but that, of course, people can get PTSD or have PTSD, deal with PTSD for multiple reasons. But this is really the beginning of understanding that kind of trauma and what it does to body and mind. All right. I talked a little bit about the Battle of the Somme. Trench warfare is mostly associated with France and Russia as the Eastern and Western fronts. And there are places in France that's called the French Zone Rouge, the red zone, that there's so much unexploded artillery there, as well as arsenic that's from World War I, that even today there are parts of the French countryside that people aren't allowed to go. It'll probably take about 300 years for the lands to recover and for it to be not toxic anymore. So this is also an environmental disaster. Now, I know we're running out of time because we had some hiccups here. I just want to share with you, we'll go for about another 5 minutes here, that this was the war that Americans weren't so sure they wanted to enter. And Wilson creates the Committee on Public Information, the CPI, to create propaganda to encourage Americans to support the war. And by the way, when I say propaganda here, I mean I'm describing that as a neutral term. This is just political messaging. So this is posters trying to encourage men to enlist. You can see here this image of underwater, a woman with a little baby. This enlistment poster is directly referencing that Lusitania, that ship that was bombed. You can see here that it's reported one dead mother still is clasping in her rigid arms the body of her baby. This became part of the cultural imagination of the Lusitania, and it's referenced here, calling on men to enlist to protect women and children. And a lot of the posters from World War I really play on that idea that it's men's role to protect women and children. This is the most infamous propaganda poster of World War I, and it's sort of the much more obvious top version of this, which says, join the military so you can protect women and children from this fate. And here we have destroy this mad brute. This mad brute is Germany. You could see culture here. You don't have to speak German to know that that says culture. Militarism, this is the helmet of the Kaiser. So Germany here is presented in this animalistic, this dehumanized way, and presented as if there's something fundamentally wrong with German culture. Of course, it's presented as Germany has ravished Europe. Europe is destroyed and it's come across the Atlantic Ocean to America. There's only two of you, so I won't put you on the spot. But if there were more, I'd put everyone on the spot and say, who's this in his arms? It's Lady Liberty. And you can see here that her top has completely fallen off. There's a suggestion here of sexual danger, that you have to enlist to protect women, not simply from that U-bombing, but from this mad brute. And by the way, I can't remember if it's King Kong that's based on this poster or the poster that's based on King Kong. I think King Kong is based on this poster. Other propaganda posters are all about this coercive patriotism. Are you 100% American? Prove it. Buy war bonds. And this coercive patriotism took an ugly turn. In 1917, the Espionage Act prohibited not just spying, of course that's illegal, but expanded what it meant to interfere with the draft. So if you wrote an op-ed or a magazine, if you were writing in a socialist magazine and you were saying, don't fight in this war, don't fight against other workers of different nationalities, you could be tried under the Espionage Act for interfering with the draft. The Sedition Act of 1918 made it a crime to make spoken or written statements intended to, quote, cast contempt, scorn, or disrepute on the American form of government. And this is what got Eugene Debs in trouble. Eugene Debs is critical of capitalism. He's critical of the American government for entering this war. Other socialists, like I said, are discouraged. The idea of the IWW, remember the International Workers of the World, was that all the workers should band together, not fight each other because they're different nationalities. They're really disturbed by World War I and speak out against it for that reason. And some socialists like Debs get arrested. Debs is the most famous socialist of his time. He runs for president 4 times. The last time he runs for president is in 1920, and he runs from a jail cell. So he runs from prison for president, and he gets almost 1 million votes. So that's pretty substantial. He was running from prison. And you're going to read his speech to the jury, where he says, freedom of speech is fundamental. The right of Americans to criticize our own government is fundamental. We don't put it on pause because we're at war. And he argues for this freedom of speech passionately and creates a new understanding of freedom of speech, right? One that's like, you can't do away with it at any time, whether we're at peace or at war. And pay attention, he's also going to compare himself to other Americans who resisted other wars. And he's going to compare himself to abolitionists, to say that sometimes people with really unpopular views turn out to have been on the moral high ground. And he says that's going to happen to him as well. He also pokes at American capitalists a little bit. He says, isn't it weird that socialists are the ones saying that we have to uphold the Constitution? So take his speech. Like I said, you don't have to be a socialist to agree with Debs. You don't have to agree with Debs to analyze Debs. So take a look at his speech in the context of the Alien and Sedition Acts, and think about, why is this speech in the history books? Why is it so important that he defends freedom of speech in this moment in 1918? All right, thanks for sticking around.